Kelly Dunbar. I'm your host for the Out of Control Dog Summit panel that we're doing today. It's a mouthful right there, Out of Control Dog Summit panel. And I have a great group of speakers here that I've selected to introduce the idea of the entire summit to you. So let's get started. I'll introduce everybody first. So let's start with Ness. Ness, please raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Ness is a certified separation anxiety pro behavior consultant. She is also a canine behavior practitioner and has a diploma in canine behavior from the International School of Canine Psychology and Behavior. She founded the Separation Anxiety in Dogs Decoded, which is dedicated to help dogs live without stress or panic, giving their dog guardians their lives back. That's a big one. And now next we have Kamal Fernandez. Kamal, raise your hand. Hello.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't
an imposter. Who's the real Kamal? You'll be quizzed later. Kamal Fernandez is a well-known dog sports coach with over 25 years experience. He's participated in Crufts as a competitor, judge, and steward, and now travels internationally to give seminars on all things canine. In addition to his seminar work, Kamal provides animals for TV, gives training classes, and works with cases of dog aggression and rehabilitation. Very well-rounded. Next, we have Dr. Ian Dunbar. Ian, there we go. Dr. Ian Dunbar is a veterinarian, animal behaviorist, and dog trainer who invented and popularized the off-leash puppy class, puppy and training and socialization, that is, hosted 6 seasons of Dogs with Dunbar television program in the UK, and has also written several dog training books and produced numerous dog training videos. He heads up the Dunbar Training Academy, where you can find easy, effective, and enjoyable dog training techniques. He's the trainer's trainer and undoubtedly one of the most respected dog trainers in the world. Yay, Ian. And last but absolutely not least, we have Jo-Rosie. I bet you can all guess who that one is. There she is. And Jo-Rosie makes up 1/3 of the School of Canine Science, an online school that teaches more than 20,000 dog trainers internationally. Jo-Rosie is an animal behaviorist with a degree in applied psychology and a postgraduate in behavior. Jo initially worked for a large rescue organization before moving to private behavior clinic, where she spent time mainly working with Section 1 and Section 3 dangerous dogs, resulting in her becoming an independent expert witness. Very interesting stuff as well. So, welcome everybody to the panel, both the guests and the audience. This is the launch, the kickoff for the Out of Control Dog Summit, which I hope you'll attend. We have 4 days of very exciting interviews and presentations, as well as live question and answer sessions every single day. So I look forward to seeing all of you again and again over this week, and let's get started. So we're going to do this backwards because I introduced in one way. We're going to go around the other way. Jo-Rosie, let's start with you. Can you give the audience a few minutes, a little brief description of your presentation and what we discussed in the interview?
So in this summit, I did an interview with Kelly and we talked about what dogs bite and why. So primarily we looked at the motivation of why many dogs in the household do end up getting trouble biting. And I think that one of the things that we touched on a lot, which doesn't often get touched on in these kind of events, was formal handling and some practical guidance as to how to deal with formal handling problems. So when you either go to move your dog off the sofa, or you're trying to groom your dog, or you're trying to get your dog to the vet or something like that, and there's a more formal situation where you have to have some level of tactile interaction with your dog, and how and why that can often go wrong, and why it goes on for some dogs, but not for some other dogs, and then what to do about it. I think that's covered just about everything we talked about, doesn't it?
It was a pretty deep conversation. We had fun, but yes, it was very practical and intense at times, but I think very useful work because, dog bites are something that really freak people out. And anyway, here we go. So going backwards, now we go to Ian. Ian, would you care to tell us a little bit about what you'll be presenting about at the summit?
I'm glad you're asking me today and not yesterday. Yeah, I'm going to remove the description dog trainer, I think, from my introduction So anyway, we filmed it yesterday.
So you're doing a presentation with dogs.
Yeah, so I was just, because time is short, quickest way. So basically, it's about when you have a dog who's totally out of control, over the top, off leash in terms of his play style, so that you are treated as a leper in the dog park or even on leash on the street. Various exercises that you can do, such as bringing it indoors and doing it on a carpet. Many advantages to that. If they're playing tug, it restricts play because they want traction. So they don't, you know what our living room is, it's a racetrack. But no, it all happens on the carpet. And then several principles about it. The reason why they're out of control is the dog is totally disconnected from the person. The owner has to be a part of this. The dog, strangely enough, requires instructions, guidance, and a running commentary in terms of feedback. So the feedback, a simple yes or good dog or food treat, isn't going to do it. You've got to use the distraction, the problem as the reward. So you've got to integrate very short training interludes or interruptions into play. And every time you interrupt, you can then say, go play. And so now go play reinforces come here, sit, down, stay, go play, etc. And we had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the actual footage.
It's out of control.
You you're demonstrating out of control dogs. Okay, someone had to do it.
Actually, the funny thing was, as soon as we turned the cameras on, these are the best two dogs in the county. And I said, we just take them outside, because I've got a dog I've only known for a day. I just picked up to get down to San Diego, and then my dog I'm living with, a dog of little brain, and you let them off leash and they're spastic. So we take them down there, they're spazzo, they start filming, and they're calm. So we suggested that's the best thing to do. What you got to do is film this, to send it to Kelly and Jo-Rosie and Kamal and Ness and everyone. And that's it, cured.
Perfect. Then I think that's the summit in a nutshell. There we go. We're finished. No, all right. Thank you for that, Ian. Kamal, you're next on the list. Would you care to elaborate on your topic that we discussed?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for asking. Thank you, obviously, for being part of the summit. My topic is dog-to-dog reactivity, and reactivity is a buzzword that seems to be going around in many circles of training ethos and philosophy, which is all consuming, all encompassing everything from the overzealous greeter to the dog that wants to eat another dog. And essentially it's a label that has little benefit to actually helping dogs and people overcome the challenges. Is the dog fear? Is the dog's aggression? Is it fear-based? Is it prey-driven? Is it a frustrated greeter, and so forth? And it's getting people to be more specific in finding the core root of what's causing the dog-to-dog issues. So hopefully people will leave with some better insight into understanding their dogs and hopefully resolving their problems.
Excellent. That was a great conversation. So I can't wait for all of you to hear this. These are my favorite people. Everybody was selected by me, and it's like a dream come true. And now, Ness. We had a great conversation as well. And this is an area where I think a lot of people feel very out of control. Let's talk a little bit about your subject.
Yes, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me onto this amazing summit. Out of control dogs is such a great topic because there's so many of them, and many of my clients have out of control dogs. So we're talking about dogs that go into an absolute panic the minute mum or dad walks out the door. So I've heard of dogs jumping out of 2-story windows, and that's not actually uncommon. It's pretty bad. Dogs that actually have meltdowns so badly that they soil despite being house trained. Dogs that will destroy the furniture, belongings. They can actually really hurt themselves. I've had clients, the dog's been left out in the backyard and they've jumped over the fence, cut themselves up really badly, climbing up on a shed to jump over the fence. There's some really horrific stories out there. So basically what we talked about was, how do we address this? How do we help the dog to learn that being home alone is actually not something to panic about, not something to freak out about, and that they can actually be calm and relaxed when mum and dad walk out the door?
Yes, and I think this is also a place where it transitions into every topic that we're going to discuss today is we talk about the dogs being out of control, but honestly, it is just as much about the humans feeling out of control and a little lost. And as you said, it's about gaining control, but also gaining control through connection, not just training. I think that was a theme that kind of ran through all the different discussions that I've had over the last several weeks. Okay, let's get started. And we're all looking from slightly different perspectives. So what would each of you define as an out of control dog? And Kamal, let's start with you on this one.
So for me, what would really define an out of control dog is one that the big thing that I see most commonly is the dogs that just aren't educated. People assume that the dog is similar to an iPhone. You plug it in, you charge it, and therefore you can use it, and don't realize that there's plethora of education for them to maneuver our very undog-like world, a very anti-canine society that we live in, where our dogs have to be largely seen and not essentially is what people wrongly believe that dogs how they should behave and operate. And I think that as a result of that, people just don't educate their dogs about the fast-moving thing, the barky dogs, the strange sounds, social etiquette, social norms, how to behave in a coffee shop, all those things that we take for granted that require education. I think that for me, that's definitely something that can contribute to dogs being out of control, is just lack of education.
Absolutely. And so we're gonna talk a lot about that over the next week. And and again, I would say, lack of education at both ends of the leash. So dog training is people training. So running theme for sure. All right. Who wants to go next? Don't all reach. Okay, Jo. Me. Jo's next. Jo-Rosie.
Okay. So for me, I think it's about it's the dog understanding a sufficient communication system between itself and the owner. As Kamal was saying, it's a domestic dog, a pet dog has to live in a domestic world, which primarily has rules that are driven by us. And therefore we have to have a consistent, systematic way of communicating with the dog. And so I think for me, an out of control dog is a dog that hasn't been set up with a sufficient communication system. Now, and the reason that I think that's kind of a good way of looking at it is that some dogs are born with better communication systems. Some dogs are born with really good inbuilt systems of communication with humans. And I hate to be breedist or whatever, but you can often find a really nice little black lab that almost comes out the womb understanding, oh, when you do this, I need to do this. And when you do that, I'll do this. And has like the genetics that set him up. And he has prepared learning and epigenetics and all these other fantastic genetic setup to make it easy for him to very easily learn a system of communication with his owner and how to do the right thing, or the right thing that we're giving them. Then you also get a lot of other dogs, and I hate to be breed specific again, but I can definitely say this from my own experience because I've had loads of them and I've fostered loads of them and I love them and I work with them. Often the bully breeds who have very much born with competing motivators and things that motivate them almost in the opposite direction sometimes of wanting to make the right decision. And therefore we have to put in a lot more learning, as Kamal was talking about, a lot more education to give them and to set them up with a better communication system, more motivation to do the right thing for us. So for me, it's all about communication strategies and building a strategy whereby the humans can communicate with the dogs and the dogs can communicate with the humans.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. All right, Ness, what do you think about what is an out of control dog through your lens?
Yes, so mine's slightly different to you guys. What I see when I think of an out of control dog is a dog that stopped thinking for itself. It's in such a panic because of it's got this separation anxiety that it's not actually using its brain properly how we would like to. It's not thinking anymore.
Excellent.
It's in such a panic. And that's why they really are out of control. So obviously we do need the communication and all those things, but often we have to also teach that dog that it's okay to be home alone and not tapping into the calm part of their mind. I think that's how I see an out of control dog, one that stopped thinking like it normally would if mum and dad were around.
Yeah, like maybe not out of control in the sense of the environment, but like literally not in control of their own thought process and pattern.
Yeah, and that of course flows on to the behaviours that we see. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Ian, I see you writing notes.
Oh, it shows. Yeah, because that's why I wanted to go second. I have no short-term memory.
Oh, I thought you could wrap it all
I
up.
wanted to respond to Kamal, whatever he said. I can't remember now. No, I did. To me, I'm really with the nitty-gritty, and I define it absolutely that an out-of-control dog is, and I'm concentrating on the relationship and training side, is a dog that has less than 90% response reliability percentage, i.e., you give multiple commands and you get no response. So you're totally out of control. It gets even worse, though, because people don't even give commands. They will just stand on watching the dog do stuff, scary stuff, or stuff where they're so scared. And there's no comfort, there's no guidance, there's nothing, because we have been trained in the past 120 years, number one, never to give instructions. You just give a command and then jerk the dog for not doing it. And then with a short little 20-year spell of lure reward training, where number one on the agenda is teaching ESL or English words as a second language so we can give instructions, and most importantly, give instructive feedback when they get it wrong. So to me, you can eliminate any kind of painful or scary punishment just by simply saying one word: Rover, shush. We were doing that yesterday, actually, and my silly dog learned it in about 5 minutes. Oh, shush means come to you, sit and be quiet. Wow, incredible. Single word: toilet. Sit is my favorite. That gets rid of a good 90% of behavior problems right there. And if you add on sit and watch. And so I think we've got to really go back and to the nitty-gritty. The teaching ESL is the number one item on the agenda if you want any relationship. We can't rely on all dogs being Labrador puppies, that we want them to understand what we say so we can modify and modulate their behavior. And then the feedback has to be rich. And that means it can't be quantum. I mean, it can't be a single tree. It can't be yes. It has to be analog. So not only does it say you get it right, but within that, it lets the dog know how well you did. Like, good dog. Woohoo, hot damn diggery. And also, it has to be instructive if ever the dog goes off track. If you look at the definition of punishment, most aversive punishments aren't actually punishments by definition, because they don't decrease or eliminate the unwanted behavior, as evidenced by dogs still on leash and dogs still wearing shock collars after many months or maybe years. And by just providing instruction to the dog, they suddenly get it, because the definition of punishment is in itself woefully insufficient. It only says it will decrease the frequency of or eliminate the immediately preceding behavior. I add on the end in my definition and get the dog back on track. So we think of punishment as like an inhibitor. Stop the dog doing this. Stop the dog being a dog. I'd much rather say speak or shush or give us a hug or settle down or run away from me or come here. And when we now change the training to high quantification by playing games, because there's no more ruthless way to quantify, the relationship just comes. And yesterday it was so funny, because not only were the dogs not being wild, they were all coming to me and sitting on their own accord. If I walked anywhere in the yard, they followed me. No, it's not what I want now. We want to get the bad stuff on camera. So
yeah, I like that you bring up games, because when people are dealing with feeling their dog is not connected or out of control, or they don't feel like they have a handle on the situation, people's stress level goes here, and then we get this cycle. And so the idea that training can be a game, I think, immediately changes the handler's whole demeanor, right? They instead of worrying, they might start smiling and laughing. And it also, I think, shows that you can go with the flow in training, and that you don't have to be perfect. The training doesn't have to be perfect to be effective, and that you certainly can have fun while training your dog. So
my best training sessions are definitely sessions where I think if you were to ask my dog, he doesn't know if we're playing or training, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like my favorite sessions are always the sessions where we've got a toy and we're mucking about, and the dog, I think if you were to ask him or her, I think they would go, oh, no, we're not training, we're just playing with a toy. Like, they wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's perfect.
And I think we should teach people how to ask a dog. is this play or training? Are you having a good time? And what we're looking for is when the dog offers all the behaviors you want that previously you had to cue. Cues should be unnecessary for a really well-trained dog because he usually knows what's coming next, unless it's an obedience exercise, of course, because you have to randomize those because you don't want the dog to anticipate that.
I guess it depends on what your definition of a cue is, though, because I always try and teach the owners that I'm working with that a cue can just be a context or it can just be a behavior that we do. And then, like, you're always cueing behavior, really, when you think about it, because if you're walking down the road and your dog's on a lead, then that should be the cue to walk nicely on a lead. And when you stop at the sidewalk, then that should be the cue to sit. Or I think that the more people can understand that you can train a dog to have a context cue, or even just breathing, releasing can be a cue for the dog to then relax or whatever. And I think the quicker that owners can see that context and our body language and all that stuff actually can be a cue for behavior, the better, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Kamal, I have a question for you. When you're working, because you've done this competition versus pet dog training and all these different things, is there a point, I know Ian has an opinion on this, but I want to hear from you, where not only are you not necessarily having to cue, or the context is the cue, but is there a place and time where you no longer have to reward, or the context is also the reward? Is that something that we can accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. The end goal certainly for me is that I build so much value for the task or the work that the work becomes self-reinforcing. So the need to have a ball, a treat as a reinforcer becomes almost secondary. And I believe, and it's interesting that Ian's raised this point, that for me, training and interaction with the dog has to go beyond cookies and toys. It has to be about underpinning your relationship with that dog, which for me is what, and I'm going to say, there's something that happened, and this is purely anecdotal. When we switched from saying yank and crank to let's use lots of cookies and lures, it's like the power went to the lure or the treat, and we stopped actually investing in the relationship. And a big thing that actually was interesting, as several of you have mentioned, about in sports we use play as a medium to teach a lot, but that entity has almost gone out of a lot of domestic dog training. People don't utilize toys as a medium to interact or play with their dogs, or even reinforce their dogs for a recall or a sit or a down, and also getting very tied into reinforcement being food and toys specifically, as opposed to the opportunity to go off again is reinforcer. So for when you're talking about competition, like behavior change in certainly the sports that I can do can be, in certain sports, it can be 15, 20 minutes. And other sports, if you took Mondio, you're talking at the top level, 45 minutes of work. So the reinforcers has to come from the task at hand. Now, yes, those dogs have a predisposition to those activities, which makes the behaviors reinforcing for that particular type of dog. However, a lot of the dogs that I have and dogs that I train, they're not the dogs that you would traditionally associate with dog sports. So it means that, and certainly my students' dogs, you have to be more creative with using reinforcement, and you have to really identify, as you always, because it's the dog that ultimately dictates what is a reinforcement, what's a punisher. You have to really dial in with that specific dog. So what's going to work with the Basenji isn't going to work with the Borzoi, isn't going to work with the Beagle, isn't going to work with the Labrador. So I absolutely think that people need to look beyond cookies and toys as reinforcement. And really, I think sports are really guilty of that. We get so blinkered about the dog getting fed for the behavior and the dog getting played with, which is brilliant. That's fantastic in theory, but there's so many more assets that we're not utilizing to make the work in itself reinforcing for the dog. That's the end goal.
Yeah.
And I think as well, with a lot of the breeds that you work with, Kamal, and obviously I've got a boxer cross as well, and a lot of your sort of boxery type dogs, I think what's massively underutilized in both sport and pet dog training is physical play. Like no toys, just physically play with your dog. Get on the ground, push them around, and they push you around.
Roughhouse them. Yeah.
I actually think that I think for many dogs, and certainly my boxer and my old pit bull as well, and possibly one of my Mallies, I don't think there's no better reward for them. And there's certainly nothing that gives us more of a bond. Like in terms of bond, they absolutely love it. And I think that we don't use it in sport, and we don't use it in pet dog training either very often.
Yeah, I had even a border collie. He was a rescue dog, and he had a history of being punished for playing, but I managed to overcome that. But his biggest reinforcer was I'd give him the toy, and I'd sit on the floor and let him sit on my lap. That was the ultimate thing for him to do, was him socially interacting with me. And you wanted, as a sports, the sports culture, you want to tug with them and all this stuff, but that wasn't his jam. And I certainly think that sports people get very entrenched on tugging with their dog or feeding their dog, which is brilliant. And it's almost, and I was talking about this recently, in that there's so many schools of thoughts about dog training, and you almost, which is why I like talking in these forums, is you want to get everybody around the same table and go, do you know what? We're all saying the same SHIT. Can we just bang our head and realize we're all having, like, sports people have great things that domestic people could do. Domestic people have great things that sports people could do. Scent work people have great things that, it's like, Jesus Christ, we're all, as hopefully for me, we're all aspiring for the same thing. Happier, more well-balanced, content dogs that live their best life. Surely that's what we're trying to do. And it just feels like we're all in our little entrenched tribes. Bubbles. It's so true. And you think, God, even, dare I say, people with opposing viewpoints of dog training to my own, I'm not going to use any particular words or jargon, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. You think, just bang your heads together. We're all striving for the same crap. Put down your spears, everybody, and just be open enough to engage in dialogues and conversations which says, oh, there's merit in that thinking. I'm not saying the tools, I'm not saying the methods, I'm saying that train of thought. You've got something there. Oh, how about my reinforcer looks beyond my ball or my tip bit? How about I physically interact with my dog? Like, I know there was a very much, people were very much, you don't physically play with them. You just use your treats, and you think, God, what a missed thought. You're like, just a misinformation or just missed moment in your training. But yeah, it's such a, when you've been involved in training and you see the trajectory of which dog training and behavior and has gone on, it's interesting to see. It's a bit like clothing. If you keep them in your back wardrobe long enough, it'll come back into fashion, really. So play was, you didn't do toy play, and now it's, oh, there's merit in toy play. Let's use that to work with reactive dogs. We were doing that 20 years ago, people. Like, but anyway.
I'd just like to add, just touching on what you said, Rottweiler on the wall behind me, his big reward was, okay, he's got the ball. He'd love to play with you, but he'd also like to go and possess it because he's a Rottweiler, right? Mm-hmm. Tapping into his genetic strides was what really enthused him in his training. And the Malinois behind me on the wall, her big thing is she'll go and get the toy, but she'll come and she will slam into me to the point where I'm staggering back. And that's her. She loves it because it gives her power, makes her feel wonderful. And so it's just looking at that particular dog in front of you and saying, how can I build this up and make it even better for them so they want to keep repeating it? Yeah.
So know thy dog, know your that's literally your dog and what the dog in front of you wants to do.
And it's what Ian was saying about, it's about you're looking to form, enhancing your relationship with that dog. So if you don't understand, to be blunt, to be really crude, what turns that dog on, your dog's gonna look for that gratification from other sources. So if you don't dial in with how that dog wants to interact, i.e., is it physical? Is it wants to possess it? If it wants to, so it will look to other sources. That normally is other dogs over the park, because other dogs are going to pick up, oh, you like to body slam. Great, let's do a bit of that. You want to run around like a headless chicken. Let's do that. You want to sit on the floor and do whatever. So if you don't appreciate what your dog likes and turns your dog on, it will absolutely look at that other sources and possibly other dogs.
And I think one of the easiest ways to find that out about your dog, and this is just, I just think, because I always think about my dogs, and I think one of the easiest ways to find that out is to look at what their greeting behaviour is when you get home, completely naturally. So, for example, I have 3 different breeds in my house at the moment. I've got 2 Malinois, I've got a boxer cross, and I've got a Hungarian Vizsla who's a gun dog. So when I get home, my youngest Malinois, her immediate thought is, can I bite your arm? And I always give her something in her mouth when I walk in, because then she gets it and she just slams it into me, as Ness says, rather than go for my arm. And my boxer just wants to jump, not on me because she knows not to do that, but she'll literally run around and just dive up in the air, just jumping up at stuff. And again, she wants something in her mouth. My Vizsla will run and get a shoe or something. She doesn't want me to take it off her. She just wants me to go, well done. That's a beautiful thing you've got in your mouth. That's lovely. And when we think about it, especially when it comes to problematic behaviours, especially when it comes to problematic greeting behaviours and dogs that are out of control in terms of their greeting, often the way that they're out of control in terms of their greeting behaviour is to do with their biological needs. I get called all the time by bully breed owners who have got bullies that will grab on to things like scarves, dive up and grab on, which is their biological need. Or you get your spaniel types who go and get something and want to possess it, and where someone's been trying to take it off them so often, instead of letting them parade it, they then get it and guard it. And actually, when we look at those natural greeting behaviours, it usually gives you the best clues in terms of what that biological need is, how the dog wants to be fulfilled.
I
think we've spent, can I just, just touching on what Jo-Rosie said. I just think we've spent so much time suppressing, traditionally, old school dog training, the dog's biological needs, that's inappropriate, let's suppress that. So, that comes back in other behaviours down the track. Sorry, Kelly.
No, please, this is a panel. We're supposed to discuss. Ian, it is your turn to speak, absolutely, but I want to pose a point that I think is related to what we all discussed, and take it from there. I think a lot of what you've all just said is probably relatively new thoughts largely to the audience. And a lot of it has to do with going with the flow of your dog. Know your dog, go with what they love or what they're genetically predisposed to do. I think a lot of time that doesn't happen because people are afraid of things getting out of control, or how do I handle that? How can I roughhouse with my dog? Or what if they chew the shoe, or whatever it may be, it's slamming. So I think people are afraid of losing control, so therefore inhibit versus embrace. Ian, do you want to speak to that and any other point you have?
And I think to summarize a lot, I think what we're all saying is that there are many rewards far more powerful than a food treat. And I think what we have to do is we have to go tug to lap. Okay, click and treat. We know it. So we turn tug into a secondary reinforcer because it's always followed by 30 seconds on Kamal's lap. We can also do tug to couch, or in Jo-Rosie's house, tug to jump up, hit me in the chest if I haven't given you something in your mouth first, or otherwise grab my arm. So then what we want the dog to do becomes actually a mega secondary reinforcer, which is self-reinforcing. You won't get reliability in training unless the response is its own reward and it's self-reinforcing. My great-grandfather years ago had a horse that the only thing it wanted to do was to walk back to the stable. So how he trained it was, he said, and on this horse eventually, he won a no reins, straight furrow ploughing contest. So this horse was under verbal control, go forward, pull harder, left up, whoa, go left, go right, and so on. But the way he trained it was, he said, if you plow from here to there, we can go back to the stable. And you'd give it a little bit of hay. Then you say, go out again. Now he'd go back and forth, go back to the stable. And then 3 trips across the field, then 4, then 5, then 8. This gradual progression till eventually plowing became this horse's sheer joy and won this fabulous contest. And so in response to Ness about old-fashioned training, 120 years ago, it was cool. Yeah, it was a lot of food, it was a lot of activities, a lot of teaching the meaning of commands by luring, and a lot of verbal feedback. And the verbal feedback used the same word as the instruction. I can't do the accent, but my great-grandfather, that's not bloody straight. And I think a very profitable endeavor is to look at all the things from 120 years ago that made training worse. And in my mind, it's 2 things: removing the teaching of the instruction and checking that the dog understands it. And then 2, changing feedback to obviously binomial, but also analog and ongoing. You should be like a horse race commentator, but commenting on your dog so he knows exactly what's right, what's wrong, how well he's doing, or how dangerous it was to get it wrong. But bit by bit, you think of dog training methods now going on leash. To me, the crime was I never harbor on the fact that's not pleasant, or that stuff, this inhumane stuff, because it causes such vitriolic feedback from people. I just say, no, it stole teaching of instructions. And then we moved to clicker training, took out praise, just like that. Praise was replaced by damn click. Now, before everyone listening here says, oh, Ian Dunbar's anti-clicker. No, I helped host the very first time that clickers were used in training dogs. I hosted the very first seminar and promoted it because I knew what it was about, what shaping was. It was highly specific uses, not to teach a dog to sit or lie down or come, because they're all non-responses. But what clicker training really gave to dog training was it eliminated the need for a forced retrieve, ear pinches, hang ear pinches with pliers, because now we had a way to teach a basset, non-retrieving breed, to retrieve in one session. But it's not a way to train pet dog to do basic all the non-responses, and it's taken the voice out of training.
I can't.
Go on, Ness.
Oh, and I was just going to touch on what Ian said really briefly. I think what you said about people forget to praise their dogs. Praise is so powerful. Oh my God. Like when I was doing pet dog training, the owner would hand the dog the treat and the dog's, yeah, all right, here's my treat. Thank you. You asked me to sit. I sat. Here's my treat. And I'm like, tell them he's a good boy as well. And the whole dog's body's all vibrating like that and you could literally see the difference. Like it was just clear as day. So I really believe in the power of praise. I think it's
not just praise. I also think an instructive reprimand is very reinforcing. And like on the video, you'll see it. I give the dog a big talking to. I said, "You call that a sit? That wasn't a sit." Will Ferrell's "This Your Dog Sarcasm in Training" routine, which you should Google if you haven't seen it. But not rewarding a dog. It's amazing. I've got before, after, within 5 seconds of a dog that didn't sit on one command. So I gave a treat to the other dog, and then he does the best behavior you can see for the next 4 or 5 commands. And one of the biggest things that has, I think, destroyed training has been the overuse of food lures and food rewards. They've become bribes. And people have forgotten that lure reward training was a 3-step process, what still is. Number 1, go cold turkey on the lure in the very first session. Number 2, thin out food rewards and increase your response reward ratio up to about 20 or 40. And you don't have them on you. And the dog knows you'll get a reward, but just food. And you get this like, I sat, treat. I went down, treat. I waved, treat, roll over. And you get these staccato dogs that you say, Rover, come here. And he comes, sits, high five, circle degree of time, jumps up, rolls over, plays dead. No, we wanted each behavior for a little longer than half a second. So I think the misuse of food treats allowed aversive punishments to get back in, because they were pretty much gone in the 90s, and then they came back with a vengeance.
I think there's 2 things that massively affect that, though. I think one of them is that dog trainers have become so obsessed with Skinner and behaviorism and operant conditioning. And I think that because there's this massive obsession with what is a punisher and what is a reinforcer, and we should use reinforcing, I think that had a big part to play, where lots of the other different psychological paradigms moved on from that and said that you can't look at behavior in a vacuum like that. And we need to look at all the different puzzle pieces that make up the animal. Dog training, for whatever reason, didn't do that. And it just became obsessed with this operant, so that the human became the Skinner's box and was just distributing treats. I think that's to blame. And then I think for the punishing thing, what I'd be really interested to hear from everyone about is, because everything we've talked about so far has been about teaching the right behavior, et cetera, but when it comes to competing motivators, I think competing motivators can often cause a lot of trouble when it comes to out of control dogs, because when you have a motivator that's outside in the environment, and that motivator is a much higher value than any of the praise and the physical play and the other stuff that we can teach the dog. At some point in the dog's life, we have to be able to say to the dog, I know you would rather go and chase that deer, but I'm going to call you and you're going to come, even though you would rather go and chase that deer. And I think that certainly when we look at control dogs that are out of control, we have to touch on that, because I think where punishment crept in my opinion, one of the things that has led more aversive methods to become more fashionable again is that the breeds of dogs that are fashionable have much higher drives and seem to be a lot more enthusiastic about competing motivators. And therefore, people are having to use suppression and having to use more aversive methods to control the dog's ability to go out and seek competing motivators.
Go, Kamal, please.
Oh, sorry. So I was going to a couple of things on both those points. So I remember going on one of Ian's seminars. Oh God, it's got to be pushing probably 25, 30 years ago.
Couldn't have been.
I was just
5 years ago.
Exactly. We won't quibble over details, Ian, but I can remember it was at some sort of trust place, and it was talking about fading lures within the first session. And I remember so profoundly that staying in my mind. And it must be really interesting and somewhat frustrating to see that messaging, how it's been like Ian said fade the lure on the first session, but he didn't really mean it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it for the next 3 years, and then but it's all fine because because Skinner says that, and it must be really interesting from a sideline of somebody that's been in spouting the good word, should we say, for such a long time to see how it's been interpreted, twisted, used against you, used for you in all different ways. It must be such an interesting thing or a frustrating thing. But on Joe's point, I think having had dogs, been a trainer that used traditional methods and my trajectory as a dog trainer, my feeling on saying when you own, obviously dogs that are predisposed to the things that Jo-Rosie's discussed is that's where absolutely you need to understand that it has to go beyond a cookie and your toy. It has to, because my dog that wants to chase a deer, if I want to use reinforcement or a label you want to attach to me and not use an aversive, I have to be a damn sight cleverer and knowledgeable about reinforcement, pushing. And the other thing that I think that reinforcement-based dog trainers can be very reluctant to is discussing failure. Like, I let my dog fail. It gets it wrong and it understands what happens when it gets wrong. You don't get the thing. And I actually, personally, I will set my dog up to make a mistake so they can understand, hey, this is what happens. Now, there's no aversive used, let's not get into the jargony, but nothing untoward. I don't beat them with a big stick. Let me keep it simple. I don't beat them with a big stick, but I do say to them, you don't get the thing that you want. And I would deliberately introduce a level of frustration into their training, which again can be controversial when you talk about it. But I do that because if they can't cope in kind of frustration that I've created in my living room, there's no way they're going to do that when it's jacked up to the nines in the real world. So again, to me, the way in which I raise my dogs is done strategically and when I believe they have a level of understanding. So they have tools of which to deal with mentally. Oh, there's a problem. How do I fix the problem? I want that thing. I want that sleeve or that toy or whatever it is, or I want the chicken wing on the floor. I understand how to get it. So when they go out in the big wide world, that has been ingrained in their thinking pattern. They've been entrenched in that thinking of, I can control the reinforcement, I can manipulate the environment. It does take more awareness. I think this is where people get constantly as if we can define what reinforcement is and we can say, this is the punishment, and this is the reinforcer. And it's getting people to understand we have no influence. It's nothing to do whether we want to be a reinforcement or punishment. We don't get a say. The dog is the dictator of whether it's a reinforcer or a punishment. So you can yank it. If you're like me and Joe have had this conversation. With my boxer, when he was tugging, if I got a 2x4 and whacked him on the head, he would have thought, thank you. You clearly like this because you're now hitting me. That's now I've just raised the level of arousal. And he goes, oh, you must like me tugging this thing because you're whacking me with it. Because that was to him reinforcement. That's the thing that people, I think, struggle with understanding. It's we don't dictate what is the reinforcement and the punisher. It is down to whether it increases or decreases behavior. And like you said, as Joe said, we get so entrenched on the 4 quadrants as if we must all die on a sword if you don't follow them avidly. And it's getting across to people and people understanding there is nuances. It is more fluid. It isn't always black and white. It isn't. And people may think it isn't black and white to say, if I give him the sausage 3 times a day, he's definitely going to ignore the neighbour's cat. It has to be bigger than that.
I think people have become really scared to give their dog non-negotiables. And you know what, this bit isn't negotiable. And I think actually if we started, certainly with my puppies, when I've got a little puppy, I'll start with a very low level non-negotiable. The dog can't do that. He's not allowed to. And I'll manage it to start with, and then I'll teach him how to do something else. And then but having those real non-negotiables where you say, in this instance, you cannot do that. That's never allowed. I think that's really important. I think we can be really frightened of providing non-negotiables for the dogs and providing situations, as you say, where the dogs are frustrated, but they're not allowed to do and get the thing they want.
I think in human education too, we can't let children fail. I love it when dogs fail, like Kamal said. You fail, hey, sniff this treat. Hey, love it, eat it. It has a huge effect. And I think the whole non-negotiable thing is, one is having a formal name for a dog, 3 names if you're competition. So when you call him by his formal name, it is non-negotiable. It doesn't have to be nasty. You just keep telling him to do it. Life will not continue until you sit. And once you sit, we're going to have to repeat the whole exercise, because this takes care of the people who say, you repeated the command. I say, yeah, with the dog I've got at the moment, I repeated the command about 12 times yesterday. But he did it, and I'll say, it's not very good. have the other dog eat the treat for you, now let's do it again. I just had an idea that this whole thing of a point that you brought up, Jo-Rosie, about the deer chasing. You see, all other chasing, we can use the chasing as a reward. See, squirrels go up trees, birds fly away, rabbits go down holes. So you can say, sit, good dog. You see the rabbit? Good, yeah, nice long sit, stay, then get the rabbit. You'll never get the rabbit, not suburban dog. So you can actually, but you can't use deer chasing. Because if you say get the deer, your dog is gone for 3 days. So if we think of a really high level sort of drive, if you like, you know, the meaning of the word, one that's unconquerable. And we use the whole subliminal bite stimulus theory of biting. They don't bite for a single reason. They've got a good 10 reasons to bite. And each one, if we stack it up on a histogram, it pierces the bite threshold and they do it. Well, deer chasing, reinforcing value, is like this. Let's work with squirrel chasing. And let's work with rabbit chasing. Let's work with playing tug and fetch and this. And if you've done that in your life with the dog, you're now going to have better control when the unconquerable, you meet him on the street, as we did with Zuzu, right outside in the street. She came nose to nose for a deer. It's about two weeks before she died. And she stood, then she sat, and I walked up and calmly put her on leash and went, shoot at the deer.
Which is something for Zuzu, because I had, when she first came into our lives, I had a very Fenton-esque moment with Zuzu out in the open space where I did not know they had goats out for grazing for fire hazards. And I didn't even see them. They were so far away. And then so was she. And then with the boser on, her stride was like a racehorse. She was fast. So that was impressive. We've gotten really deep into some interesting, I could do this all day, seriously, with all of you. I really could. I can't stop saying that with this group because it's so fun and interesting. But I think we've really touched on the idea of what to do with an out-of-control dog who is perhaps compelled to do the things that they like or need to do in life. What I'd like to touch on now is, what about when that control does come, or lack of control, or their competing feelings, I won't even say reinforcers, come from a place of anxiety? So let's start with you, Ness, because it's easy to add something, it's easy for us to add something and bring something into a dog's life that will help them come down and maybe stop being so impulsive. But when you're dealing with anxiety, it's kind of the flip side of the coin, isn't it? How would we address this? Why do some dogs get anxious, and how do we address this in a way that is the flip side of this coin? It's not the same. We can't just add something good with something.
Yeah. So anxiety is a tricky one, and it's often helpful to know why the dog's anxious. Is it a genetic thing? I'm so sorry. I keep strobing, and I do not see that's going to play a big role. But I think another reason more recently is the whole COVID situation. Many of these dogs in Australia, and I'm pretty sure maybe in America, I don't know about England and Spain, the shelters got cleared out when COVID started. They literally got cleared out. You could not get a dog for love nor money. You couldn't go to a breeder and get a dog. Everyone's like, oh, we're home now. Now's the time to get that puppy. And of course, those puppies never went out into the real world because everyone was in lockdown. They spent 24/7 with mum and dad, and they never experienced what life was like. So for me, specializing in separation anxiety, that looks like separation anxiety in the home when life returns to normal and they go out, the dog can't cope. But for other dogs, that can be, oh, I'm going out into the big wide world now. What on earth is that? It's a truck. It's a bike. That's a woman with a hat on or an umbrella. And, that anxiety is based in not being given the right socialization as a young dog. So there's that as well. So anxiety can be different. Generalized anxiety is different to just a dog that's not experienced the world. Probably that's an easier tackle than a dog that's got generalized anxiety due to maybe a genetic trait or what have you. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, the first part of it, I kind of did a two-parter. So yes, where does this stem from? And the second part of that is when the lack of control is coming from a more emotional state. And obviously, when we talk about this in your session, and we can reach out to you. It's a deeper subject, but I think I'd like us all to address what to do when it's not just excitement and arousal that is causing a dog to feel out of control. But as you said a few moments ago, Ness, when emotionally they're literally just maybe not with you in a different anxiety.
Yeah, a dog that you've got anxiety, then you've got full-blown panic, and I think you've got mild anxiety, and then you've got the dogs that just really lose it. They're just completely having a meltdown, and they're not thinking straight anymore. You can see it with one of my boys is noise phobic, and I can see him as soon as he hears his trigger, he stops thinking. He's not with me anymore. He's gone. And if he had half a chance, if he was out in a thunderstorm, he would be over the fence and gone. I wouldn't see him. He'd probably get himself run over or something.
Because that's not really a strategy. That's just a reaction. It's not like he thinks.
He's literally not thinking anymore. Some dogs are really good candidates for medication, to be honest. If they're that anxious and they need it, then by all means help them, support them, and give them that medication. But with the dogs I work with in separation anxiety specifically, it's really teaching them to be calm when the mum and dad walk out the door, the guardians walk out the door. And that is using gradual exposure therapy, desensitization, understanding what the dog's threshold is, what their ability to cope is, where's the line in the sand, where's the panic start, and working in that safe zone underneath there. And then gradually building the time up in such small increments that the dog doesn't notice and hopefully can overcome their home alone time and feel comfortable being home alone.
I'm a great believer in speed training, and especially if anxiety is involved, because that dog is hurting and people don't realize, they say, oh, my dog's shy or he's standoffish, and you do nothing about it. It's been like this for 10 years. Yet you're still walking around the block where he meets his biggest nightmare on every walk. So if we split now anxiety in, are you there and are you not? So when you're there, to me, the most extreme case is puppy's first night away from mum and litter mates and put in a crate. And they can scream and scream. And then the worst case for the other is really extreme separation anxiety, where they're destroying everything around them, running around, pacing, running into walls. So if we take the first one first, and this is something where you have to move quickly, but we run into this operant cognitive debate. Operant psychologists will say, oh, you can't go in and comfort them. That would unintentionally reinforce the screaming and the barking and all that. A cognitive psychologist says, you better get your ass in there, that you owe it to your child or your dog to do something about it. So let's operantly condition and classically condition at the same time. So they both have binary feedbacks. You put them together. We now have a quadrant that's a good one, Kamal. And basically, if they're cool, you can make a praise. So they're not scared and they're not barking. You can praise. But so if they're screaming operant, you wouldn't praise. When they stop screaming, you do. Okay. I like to go in and straight away, I'm going to calm the dog. And what I do is I lie down by the crate, and I'll be there till I've got him settled down that evening. And the worst case I've had took 3 hours of lying on the floor. And I'm saying, it's okay, puppy. I recited nonsense poems. I sang, which Kelly will laugh at that. I can't sing.
Puppy, that was close.
Because I'm so tired. I'm saying, it's all right, it's all right. So am I unintentionally reinforcing the dog? No, because when he eventually lies down or stops vocalizing, I up the level and say, oh, who's a brave puppy? Come on. Hey, wake up and have a treat. You're pretty cool. Yeah. So you can actually classically and operantly condition at the same time, but you need 3 levels of feedback. And if you do the 2 binaries in the quadrant and tick versus 0, and then you see, in one box we've got 2 ticks, in 2 boxes we've got 1 tick, in another box we've got 0. We can do it when we're there. If we say, I'm going to stay with you till you settle down, but when you settle down, I'm going to reward you. We're going to have a little party and wake you up again. Why? Because you'll settle down quicker now. How can we do that when we're not there? Stuffing Kongs was good, but people say, oh, Doug doesn't like the Kong. That's where the auto trainer was unbelievable. And 2 things about it with separation anxiety, because now it's back into the lab again with the computer giving the feedback, okay? 24/7. That's why it doesn't work in the real world, and we should just totally rewrite the whole book. It's ridiculous since people argue about it in lieu of training. But the computer now would get the dog to come close and lie down. And when we added in the debarking aspect of the auto trainer, so if the dog vocalized, it would go bzz, bzz, the bonding happened quicker. These dogs would cross the room, come up to the machine and lie down next to it. And I talked to my co-developer, who's developing developmental psychologist, kids, very young kids. And he says the dogs are bonding to this debarking machine, this separation anxiety treating machine. Even when it barks, it goes bzz. I said, do you think that then is aversive to the dog? He says, no. My interpretation is he barks, for whatever reason we don't know, we'll never know. But he says, I think when he hears the buzz, the dog says, oh, you heard me. You're listening. Someone's here. We just acknowledge the bark with no aversive punishment whatsoever. And it gets the dog to tune in better to the machine, to bond with it, to lie close to it. You don't need a crate. You just put it in one corner of the room and the dog will be there. So that's how we can take now the two commands we want, which is lie down, very calming, pacing the opposite, and shush, vocalizing the opposite. All done by a And why, since mine was taken off the market, someone else hasn't done it. The patent's retired. I still have the algorithms for doing this. It can train a dog to do anything. And people haven't really progressed in that direction. Not that it's a great way to train a dog. I like being there and having fun with it.
If you take the machine out of it, it goes back to supported connection, which is a theme that we've stuck.
Because you're gone from the house. And if they aren't good dogs with stuffed comms, if they won't touch it when they're on their own, you can't fight being conditioned when it's done correctly with incredible timing. And of course, the computer can do that. People can't. And anyway, they aren't at home. That's the problem. But this simple old machine with a very simple adaptive algorithm, just in a couple of days, the dog was cool now. He's quite happy staying with us. I wanted to call it his electronic buddy. That'd be a great name, but I was outvoted.
Jo, do you have something?
I'd just like to touch on what you were saying about the fear thing. There's that school of thought that says you have to be careful about feeding fear. I don't actually agree with that. If the dog is fearful, then they need your support, and you can't feed the fear. If your dog's having a panic attack, they need you. And then you're still working under the threshold. You're keeping them in the safe zone where they're still feeling calm. And if they're over the line, they're fearful and they need you. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's period. This is not a point that we discuss. I don't think unintentionally reinforced behavior and calming and comforting an animal or a child who's over the top with stress, they're two different things. And we've got to bring them down below the threshold. And a child's fallen over and really hurt himself. I say, oh boy, how big was that buoy on 1 to 10? Was that an 8? They say it was 6. I say, a 6, and you dealt with it. So you got to get them talking and dialogue and listening. And we can do it with puppies that are losing it and adult dogs if we're there. Hence, we have to go back to auto-shaping again.
Jo, you have something to say?
So for me, when I think about anxiety, I think we can look at it through a lot of different lenses, obviously. And for me, I think about apprehension, which is like the negative version of anticipation. And I can't help but look at it through more of an endocrinological lens and think about dopamine, which is really what can often cause that apprehension, which all stems back to unpredictability. So it's important to remember that the more unpredictability there is, the more dopamine is released. And we can see it in a positive context when we use variable reward schedules and stuff, but we can also see it with a negative variance when it comes to apprehension and animals struggling and feeling apprehensive about what might happen, which is what we're talking about really when we're talking about anxiety versus fear. And so for me, it always comes back to increasing the predictability and increasing patterning. So the more we can pattern behaviors, the more we can and because of what I work with most, I work with a lot of aggression, and also I do bite work as a hobby. For me, when it comes to reducing that apprehension, the quickest, best way I find when it comes to aggression cases is to increase the predictability of a given context and to start patterning things. So making a pattern. So for example, if you've got a dog that's scared of new people, You build a very, very typical pattern that happens the same every single time for that dog. And you can almost immediately see the apprehension of the dog reducing because they know what to expect. There isn't any unpredictability. The dopamine reduces. The dog's able to then use other parts of their body. The dog then isn't able to, but the body then physiologically uses other parts of its chemistry to create a more confident dog with more self-esteem. And so for me, a lot of it comes down to, when we're talking about anxiety and when we're talking about apprehension, a lot of it comes down to patterning and to predictability. And I also wanted to touch a little bit on the other side of things. So certainly for Kamal and for Kelly, you guys will know that when we're working with defensive dogs in bite work, often actually we can teach them that defensiveness works, drive them through that to a point where they actually feel confident about using their defensive behaviours, and then put those defensive behaviours on cue or on a context cue. And you have to really cherry pick what owners and what dogs you work with if you're going to push a dog almost through that defensive behaviour into more offensive behaviour, and then strip it back and put it on cue. But that is another way that I think that is often not utilised in pet dog training, where in a very mild way it could be used to increase confidence when it comes to apprehension and anxiety.
That's such a skill thing to do, and the thing is, it's having the expertise and the understanding to do it well. And I think obviously it's something that is done quite a lot in bite work, but it's such a nuanced thing that unless you have the ability to read the dog, it can go left really quickly. The thing that I would say about anxiety, which is following on from Ness's point, in that the pandemic definitely resulted in people coming out with a definite cause or something they could attribute their dog's behavior to, i.e. the pandemic. There was definitely separation anxiety because they were around their dogs 24/7 and they didn't ingrain any life lessons about we now and again leave you for periods of time. The other thing that I think has also happened, which would tie into out of control dogs and anxiety, is that if you look at the timeline, they're about in the midst of adolescence. So now what happened is we had a whole world of adolescent dogs from various backgrounds, Romanian rescues and cockapoos and this, that, and this colour and da, all out in the big wide world, navigating it and wondering why they've now come across these weird and wonderful variants of their own species. I think that was a bigger factor than the actual pandemic itself, because my experience with the pandemic, if I had a puppy, which I actually had 3 puppies in the pandemic, it was like heaven because nobody came up to my puppy. They gave me a nice 2-meter bubble and they stayed well away from me. So it meant that I can stalk people and walk near them, but nobody could come near my dog. It was brilliant. But what then definitely happened is as you come out of it, I now had 3 adolescent dogs. Oh shit, now I've got 3 adolescent dogs and everybody's going, all our dogs, we found freedom, let's let them off together. And then the resulting issues. I think that definitely has happened. And the other thing that is a huge contributing factor of anxiety is the correlation between humans, their mental health, what we went through, certainly in the pandemic, and what we definitely we perceive of or in our dogs, we attach to our dogs, all the stuff, our stuff that we put on our dog's shoulders and also often can be reflected in our dog's behavior, I think is a huge part of it. And that is said most definitely without judgment, because it's such an easy thing to do. You can create an anxiety loop just like that. Your dog gets anxious, it makes you anxious, which now makes the dog more anxious. And next thing, everybody's anxious on its way to anxious on a train that says anxious on it. I think the thing to take from is awareness of self. It's self-awareness and acknowledging that, do you know what, I'm feeling a bit anxious in this situation and it's fine. Employing a friend or getting a friend or family member to support you whilst you're navigating those times when you are finding it overwhelming. And the other thing is finding ways that you can talk about, own, and say, do you know what, my dog was a jackass today. I'm going to go home, have a glass of wine or whatever. I'm going to move on because tomorrow's another day. I always encourage my clients that I've got dogs with that have been out of control or that have anxiety, fear-based issues, is a bit like Ian was saying, try and record keep in some way, shape or form. And a really good exercise is get a calendar, put it in a prominent place where you see every day and put ticks on when your dog does good things in that day. So what you're going to get is an influx of information that feeds creates a dopamine hit of all those positives. And yes, you might get an odd red mark in that calendar, but if you're seeing flurry of yellow or whatever the color it is, that's going to make you change your psyche about going forward and hopefully help break that anxiety loop. And I think it's something that would be so fascinating to really look at that in a real analytical way, the correlation between behavioral challenges in dogs and mental health / anxiety / depression, all the things that as part of the human process that people go through in varying degrees and spectrums, seeing the correlation between behavior.
I see that a lot.
And I think that, yeah, definitely. And if you have a dog, sorry, go on.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, I've known people saying about separation anxiety can be all-consuming. In my opinion, the two greatest things that can affect a dog and the life that you live with your dog is the dog's physical health and the dog's temperament. And if your dog has a temperament flaw, it can literally alter the trajectory of your life, in that you are now getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to avoid the other dogs. You are implementing socialization because you don't want to mix with other people. You don't want to see your family members because you're so embarrassed by the dog. You become almost like a hermit. It's really sad that people get in this downward spiral rather than just take each little idiosyncrasy that the dog has as one little part of the extension of their relationship and just working on that bit and then growing that and growing it. And that's, I think, which hopefully is what this conference is this summit is going to really do, get people to think differently about their dog's behavior.
I think that is so important. So what I see with my clients is like, they feel trapped. We call them the furry jailer because their dog has become their furry jailer. They don't want to leave them at home alone. They can't see their family and friends because they feel like they can't leave their dog. So then there's the backlash from them. It's an emotional roller coaster. It keeps them up all night. They say it makes them anxious. And it's exactly what you said, Carl. The dog has got this behavior and makes the owner anxious. That makes the dog. It's a horrible cyclical cycle. So I actually tell them, like, we understand we're going to work on this issue, but what I really want you to do is take a couple of days off a week and have some almost mental health days. Go and enjoy your dog and remember why you got your dog in the first place, and just enjoy who they are and why they are and your relationship. Build your relationship again. Go to the beach, go to the park, or whatever it is. But the other thing I do is, if you're going to do some training, before you do anything, take a deep breath, maybe do some yoga or some meditation and just calm your mind before you actually do a thing, and get your breathing the same rhythmically. It sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but it actually can work if you can take that deep breath and try and tune into both your psyches and get everybody nice, relaxed in a nice, relaxed manner. And then it's going to make training a lot easier.
Well, that's an excellent.
Totally agree.
It's an excellent point, because when it's not just the dogs that are here, it's the people. And it does become the cycle. Yeah, take a deep breath, breathe, be in your body, connect with your dog, remember why you love them and the good times, and then see them for who they are.
I think just to say on that point, Kelly, is I'm going to be probably a bit foolhardy in saying this, but I suspect everybody on this panel has had a moment with a dog where you're like, oh my God, what the hell have I taken on? This dog is like from Satan, the spawn of Satan. Or you're wishing that, is it appropriate for me to take this dog back to the breeder? Oh shit, I bred it. The case may be. So I think everybody, I would say, has had that experience. It's part of what owning a dog is. It's really, if you have enough dogs, law of averages says you're going to get one that's going to push the button. Mine was fortunately in a lot of ways, was the first dog I ever owned. And it was largely down to my lack of knowledge and my ignorance about what, again, I thought she was an iPhone, even the days of not having an iPhone. And I thought she would be Lassie. And it was a short, sharp shock to realize she wasn't. But the thing to say to people is we have to, again, it comes back to so many things that affect how people view dogs, but it's getting away from that Disney-esque mentality. It is normal for your dog to hit adolescence and you want to get goldfish and wish you got a cat. It's normal. That's perfectly normal. All my male dogs in adolescence, I love them, but I'm not their biggest fan. I will openly say that. Every single male dog I've had have driven me nuts when they're adolescents. It might be just being rambunctious. It might be they want to go and pick a schoolyard fight. It's just the usual stuff they go through. And the thing to say is, and this man sounds cliched, a bit corny, but that really is what creates your relationship. It's those peaks and troughs that actually form that bond. When you do overcome struggles, that's when your real bond is really, in my opinion, formed.
Beautiful. I also think that it's one of those times where problems are often created Because I think like my biggest mantra for anyone who's got an adolescent dog is, I promise you, it's just a phase. Treat it as a phase. It's just a phase. Because I think what I see happen with trainers and owners alike is that their dog gets into adolescence and maybe it becomes reactive to other dogs. I know you hate that word, Kamal, sorry. Maybe it starts barking at other dogs, or maybe it starts to get really anxious when you leave it for the first time and it's never done that before, or maybe it starts chewing the furniture, or maybe but 9 times out of 10 in those situations, it's just a phase, and you manage it rather than treat it as a problem. If the dog's in that range of adolescence, if you think my dog's in adolescence, for me, when I have fosters, which I have all the time, and with my own dogs and with the plethora of dogs I've had in the past, the best combat for those behaviours in adolescence has been going, this isn't a problem. I'm not going to treat it like a problem. I'm not going to start trying to train it as if it's a problem. I'm just going to manage it because it's going to go away, because the dog's in adolescence, and this is what happens during adolescence, the same way it does for every other species on the planet. And so I think it's one of those things that really we have to drill that phrase into everyone we talk to. If you've got an adolescent dog, it's probably just a phase.
Especially if you raised that dog when you did your prep work, right? You know, if you knew the dog all along, especially. Sorry, Ian.
All right. If we look at reactivity of any kind, just being overactive, hyperactive, rambunctious, imbustious, whatever, I think we want to teach dogs to have the equivalent of the human deep breath. And I find the 3 most important things to teach these dogs are settle down, shush, and chew this Kong, stuff with food. And the chewing of the Kong, of course, as Jo-Rosie will tell you, will self-medicate, internally medicate the dogs. We've got to, a wonderful analogy for anxiety is, I think the biggest problem is people don't know what to do. They don't know how to act. So all sorts of stuff comes out. A wonderful analogy is drilling in the military. And the British were incredible at this. They said, we're going to teach you quick march, attention. And then we're going to make you wear big red tunics so you stand out like a bullseye on the battlefield and you'll all go forward in a line and get machine gunned. And why on earth would those soldiers march forward? Because drilling together was what gave them the confidence. They didn't know how to act, so they were told, this is how you will act. And that eventually became a calming thing when going into extreme fear. Like you're actually going over that trench into machine gun fight. You're kidding me. But you all did it together because you were drilled together. And then people have this sort of negative attitude for, oh, you're training the dog. No, I want to deal with anxiety. I said, when you're out on leash, settle, look at me, shush, is the best thing you can do, because that will affect the behavior of all the other dogs and people out. If you've got a Rottie going, ooh, that lady crosses the road and picks up her child. But if your Rottie lies down, then he sits up, then he becomes a bear, yep. They all go, ha, 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 and everyone calms down. So I think putting these calming behaviors on cue, it can really help the dog out. And when I do the puppy thing, first night puppy, and I've done about 2 this year already, I did 6 last year, first night with the puppy, I get him in the morning, all except our puppy, which we got late at night. But I get him in the morning. Why? So I can teach him, come, sit, settle down, chew this. Then I take it away. So he wants to chew it. So when the sun goes down and I say, settle down, you must lie down and shush. And I repeat it 100 times until they do. I say, good. Hey, get up, wiggle, come on, have a treat. Now, settle down. Because I know if we limit the movement and the noise, and then we start up any repetitive activity, chewing on a chew toy sounds pretty good, we're going to get the dog calmer. So I think we should always, regardless of what's the etiology, internal, external, whatever, developmental, we should always think results based on this. What can we do to make that dog feel better, as evidenced by he's lying down, wiggling or waggling his tail? And we should time it. I really want to see in training a dialogue that, oh, I can train my dog to do, my puppy to do a 2-minute sit stay before he's 6 weeks old. And then I want some trainers to say, oh, bullshit. But others, I want to see the video of how they did this. And then we know who to listen to. A lot of people listening to the blog today probably hadn't heard of a number of us and think, it's like these days, no one's heard of me. It's only you folk have heard of me. but the general public hasn't. Who is Ian? What's he got to offer? But if I had a fact to offer and say by the second night, I expect that puppy to sleep in the crate without a whimper for 6.5 hours, and I'm lying in a room next to the training room with my ears open to rush in and calm him. But always on the third night, it's worked.
Mm-hmm. Always.
I agree. And I think on that, time should be for me, time is one of the pillars of ethics. So when it comes to the ethical dilemma of what is ethical training, I think time needs to be one of the pillars. And I think people often forget it. I think people often think it doesn't matter if it takes 6 months. It does if the dog is stressing the hell out in its kennel. Then absolutely time, efficacy, as well as all the other things that we think about, like with kindness and all that type of stuff. But time has to be one of those pillars.
On your point and actually Ian's point, I don't know what's happened in that people want a convoluted, long-winded answer, as opposed to, Ian mentioned, if you just teach it to sit, that's going to probably save you 95% of your problems if it does a really good sit. And it's it can't possibly be a sit. It has to be, I line it chakras, I hop on one leg, I burn incense, and then I do, just teach it to sit.
People have become obsessed with changing the emotional state, and they've forgotten the fact that the behaviour and the emotional state are connected. People have forgotten the fact that even Darwin said, what did he say? The outward expression of an emotion intensifies it. Like that it's so important that we remember the fact that when you behave, your emotions change, and when your emotion changes, your behaviour changes. And therefore, obedience is so important. And people have I think a lot of trainers have actually lost that, and they've started to become obsessed with changing the emotional state as if that is different to actually just teaching a dog to obedience. You can often obedience your way completely out of an emotion.
Yeah, so the dog feels good, he's smoking dope, but he still didn't fetch the dumbbell or take the sleeve. You see, these games are so wonderful because you don't have to deal with the difficult link in the chain, which is the owner. They want to talk about it. They want to give you whatever. No, you just tell them, here are the rules, here's what we do. First one wins, and you get a ribbon. They just get to it, and they have the fastest recall. Like when we do the doggy dash at the games, we don't have non-recalls. I have on film probably the only non-recall we had, a Rottweiler who came so fast to his owner, ran by and jumped on the judge's table, scattering all their papers. No, all the dogs come when called. Some of them don't sit when they get there, but we never have a non-recall because we're playing a game. And the wonderful thing is the way you deal with not following instructions. You say, eliminated. I love it. I love the kind of cage. You take off your hat and you throw it. But why? Your dog didn't sit. Your dog came, he beat the other dog across the line, but he had to come and sit and you tap him on the head. You didn't follow. And then they follow instructions because you can eliminate them if they don't.
People follow instructions, but also they're creative in the way that they get the behavior. That's what I'm hearing with the recall. Because when you say that everyone recalls, it's not that everyone came marching forward and became upset. Like you said, it's the people get animated and they figure out what their dog likes and how to draw them in.
Like in Japan, they are crazy. It's a wonderful country to watch. They say, puppy, come.
All right.
And it's silly stuff, but oh my God, my owner's freaking out. I better get to her quickly and calm her down.
Okay. I think we have touched on so much that if we continue, we're going to just blow everyone's minds.
There'll be no point in them coming to this.
As much as we've touched on, there's still so much more. And we have several days of this coming up. Thank you all for doing this. I want to encourage the audience to continue to learn every day with us this week. And you can participate. We have the live Q&As every day. And depending on, I'm not going to give time zones because that entirely depends on where you are. And even with our little group here, that's almost impossible to figure out, but it will be listed in your time zone if you look at the link below. And thank you all for joining me. This has been super fun. I would love to do this again someday in person. I don't know, while we're sitting by a pool or with a glass of wine or beer somewhere. I don't know. It'd be fun just to all be in the same place at the same time. So.
Thank you. And I'm going to go and enjoy my dance party now.
This has got to get back to her dancing. Anybody have anything else that they want to say? Otherwise, all of you out there can look forward to seeing more of these lovely and brilliant people this week because we have conversations and presentations from all of them. So,
thank you for having me.
I've listened to most of these people and they are stellar. Yeah, the summit's going to be a really good one.
It's going to be great.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
Thank you all. Good morning and good night. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Good to see you.